Hi everybody, so today we're going to be talking about Bell's palsy. And basically, what is Bell's palsy? Well, Bell's palsy is a temporary paralysis to one side of the face. Now, can it occur on both sides? One side of the face. Can it occur to both sides? Yeah, but that's kind of uncommon for it to occur on both sides, okay? So it's normally to one side of the face. Now, it's usually due to a disruption or damage to cranial nerve 7. So damage to cranial nerve 7. And if you recall, cranial nerve 7 is the facial nerve. And cranial nerve 7 is a mixed nerve. So what we mean by mixed is it's both motor and sensory. So we're going to go through this in a little bit about the sensory and motor portion of it, okay? What can cause this damage or disruption? Well, it can be caused by several different things, but first, before I even go on, they're not quite sure what causes Bell's palsy, okay? So for the most part though, what they think it might be is due to some viruses and other things, so let's go into those. So the viruses would be something like the herpes simplex virus, right, which causes cold sores. It could be varicella zoster virus, which causes chickenpox and shingles. It could be cytomegalovirus. It could also be a bacteria, right? You could get it from something called Borrelia burgdorferi, which causes Lyme disease. Some other conditions that might cause this, that may be the cause of this, is pregnancy. People may get it from if they're obese, so obesity. High blood pressure. May be other causes, possible causes of this. Sometimes there's a correlation between this and sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is an inflammation that's all around the body, and then your body forms granulomas to cover it up. So that's sarcoidosis, and it's kind of more common in people who have diabetes. So there's some possible causes of it. So now let's go ahead and we're going to take a look of what's happening with this. So let's just move this right over here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to draw the head, okay? So what you're doing is you're looking at the brain here from the side, as if you're looking at someone from this side here and they're facing that way. So what's going to happen is back in here, we are going to have the cerebellum. And if you remember, the cerebellum hangs like a bell off the back of the brain. Then we have the cerebrum, which is the larger part of the brain. So this is going to be the cerebrum that's right here. Then in the brain, we are going to have something called the central sulcus. Okay, now, a sulci, these are the valleys that you see in the brain. If you've ever seen a picture of a brain, you probably see a bunch of little black lines in it. That's the sulci. Well, in the brain, you have one that's right in the middle, and it's called the central sulcus. Sulci is plural, sulcus is singular. And this is a landmark that distinguishes the front of the brain from the back of the brain. Okay, so that's going to be the central sulcus right there. So then what we're going to have is we are going to have something called gyri. The gyri are the solid parts of the brain. So if you ever, when you see a picture of a brain, the solid part of the brain is going to be the gyri. Because this gyri, or gyrus, because this gyrus is in front of the central sulcus, we call this the precentral gyrus. Okay, gyri is plural, gyrus is singular. Now, inside of this precentral gyrus, we're going to have what we call the primary motor cortex. Remember, motor means it's going to move muscle. The cortex is going to be the outer part, right? So this is the primary motor cortex. Now I'm going to draw another part of the brain right now, and we're going to call this the brainstem. It's going to be this part right here, we're going to call the pons. Okay, and then inside the pons, we're going to have this nucleus. Now I'm going to draw this really big, but it's not that big, and it's actually kind of down here near the bottom, but I'm going to draw this really big, and we're going to call this the facial nucleus. And the facial nucleus is important because this is going to be basically where my 7th cranial nerve is going to come out from. In my facial nucleus, I'm going to have two parts to this. I'm going to have the anterior facial nucleus and the posterior facial nucleus. Okay, so I'm going to have my anterior facial nucleus and my posterior facial nucleus, and this is going to be important in just a minute. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And here's what's going to happen. Is in this primary motor cortex, I am going to have a tract. A tract is made up of a bunch of nerve fibers, right? Basically all going in the same direction. So I'm going to have a tract that's going to come out of here. Now what I need you to do is pretend like this is on the other side of the brain and it's going to cross over to this side. I'm going to draw that in just a minute to make it make more sense. But for right now, this is okay. So here's my primary motor cortex. So this tract is going to come out of here. And it's going to come down and it's going to go into the anterior facial nucleus, but it's also going to come and go into the posterior facial nucleus. So you see it's in the front and the posterior portion. We're going to call this right here, we're going to call this the contralateral, and we call it contralateral because it's going from one side to the other. So this is going to be my contralateral cortico-bulbar tract. All right, that's the contralateral cortico-bulbar tract. So if I have a contralateral cortico-bulbar tract, I'm also going to have an ipsilateral cortico-bulbar tract. So now you got to pretend like this one's on the same side of the brain that this is going to be going down to. So, and again, I'll draw this and it'll make more sense in a minute. So now this guy's going to come down, and he's going to come down, and he is only going to go into the posterior facial nucleus. So my contralateral cortico-bulbar tract goes into the anterior facial nucleus and the posterior facial nucleus. My ipsilateral cortico-bulbar tract only goes into the posterior facial nucleus. So you see that? So now let's see why that's important. So one more thing before I go on. These are going to be called upper motor neurons. I'll get more into that in just a minute. But just so you know, these are called upper motor neurons. Facial nerve is going to come out of here and it's going to be a lower motor neuron. So I'm going to move this over just a little bit like this. And what I'm going to do now is pretend like we just saw that picture there. We're looking at the head from the side. Pretend like I cut it in half this way. I take off the face, and now you're looking this way. Okay, so pretend that that's what we're doing now. Now I'm going to draw that. This isn't going to be a great picture of a brain, but for the most part, it's going to look something like this. All right, we're looking in on the brain. And going around the brain, I am going to have the cortex. So here's the cortex right here. Okay? Now, if you recall, when we were over here, I said to pretend that the blue is on the opposite side of the brain. We called it the contralateral cortico-bulbar tract. There's my contralateral cortico-bulbar tract right there. And let me draw my brainstem real quick. So this is going to be the brainstem. That's my pons again, in the pons. And now I'm going to draw the facial nucleus. But I'm going to draw the facial nucleus as if we're still looking at it from the side. So I'm going to have my anterior facial nucleus and my posterior facial nucleus, okay? And there's my lateral cortico-bulbar tract that's going to be starting from right here. So this is going to come down now. It's going to come down, and it's going to when it gets to the pons, it's going to cross to the opposite side. Again, that's why we call it the contralateral, because it's crossing to the opposite side. So there's my contralateral corticobulbar tract. Now I'm going to draw my ipsilateral corticobulbar tract. Right? This is going to be ipsilateral corticobulbar tract. And now this guy is going to come down and just go into this posterior side. Okay, so that's going to be the ipsilateral corticobulbar tract. So now you get an idea of how these go. So now let's do this. Now we got to form our facial nerve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw a picture of a face real quick. Let's just finish this brain. I'm going to draw a picture of a face real quick. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look of what's going to happen here, okay? I have my posterior facial nucleus, and what I'm going to have is, as you know, a nucleus is going to be made up of cell bodies, and it's going to be in the central nervous system, right? And this is going to come out and go this way, okay? Then I'm also going to have some nerves that are the facial nerve that's going to come out from here. This is going to be the anterior facial nucleus. And this is going to come out, and it's also going to go this way. So both of these together are going to make up the facial nerve. Okay, so these are going to make up the facial nerve. So this is my facial nerve. Down in here, okay? So now, if you recall, we said that these were upper motor neurons, right? Because they're in the brain. These are going to be lower motor neurons that are down in here. And they're going to come out to the face. Now I'm making it look like it goes to the side. Remember, this is kind of, it's going to be back behind the face. So this is what's going to happen. The nerve, the part of the facial nerve that comes from the anterior facial nucleus is going to go to the lower part of the face. So it's going to come out here, and it's going to have a branch that's going to come off to this right here. And these are going to be facial muscles. Remember, the facial nerve is responsible for facial expressions, okay? So it's going to go to there. Now, another part's going to come off. Well, let's go ahead and talk about this. So now, what's going to happen if there's damage to this nerve? Those facial muscles are not going to work. Now, you have them all over, but those facial muscles are not going to work, and you are going to get facial drooping. Now, because this is in the lower part of the face, what's going to happen is one side of the mouth is going to droop. Okay, so we're also going to have this lower part's going to come up to here, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. That's also going to be a facial nerve. Here's the next thing that's going to happen, is you're going to have a branch that's going to come, and it's going to come to here, and then you're going to have a branch that's coming out and going to here, to these glands, right? This is going to be my sublingual salivary gland. So it makes saliva, right? Now, if I have damage to this nerve, what's going to happen is I am not going to be able to make saliva. This here is the submandibular, it's under the jaw. The submandibular salivary gland. So if I get damage again to this nerve, I'm not going to be able to make saliva. So one of the things that people are going to complain about is they're going to have a dry mouth when they have Bell's palsy, okay? So really quick though, don't forget, you still have something called the parotid salivary gland, which is up here by the ear. And I still have all the salivary glands on the other side of the body that are still working properly. And those are basically going to still be working. So when this facial nerve is not working, a person's going to get drooping to one side of the mouth, like we said, right? And because they're still producing saliva, what's going to happen is they may start drooling. So drooling may be a part of this too. And they also may have speech impediments. They may have difficulty speaking, right? So they may have a speech impediment. Now let's look at the next thing that's going to happen. This is the tongue, okay? So what happens with the tongue is the facial nerve is responsible for taste to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. This is going to be a little bit different because if you recall, we talked about the facial nerve is also a sensory nerve. So what's going to happen is we have nerves that come from the tongue and they start going back towards the brain. But if the facial nerve has some damage, then what's going to happen is you're going to lose that taste. But if you recall, we're going to have a facial nerve on the other side. That's still going to work. The back of the tongue is also gets nerve supply from something else. But let's say the damage is on this side. What's going to happen is I'm going to lose my taste sensation to this side of the tongue. So therefore, I get a decrease in taste sensation. Okay, so now if we go on, if we look over here, this is the ear. Now technically I should have drawn the ear over here because of the fact that this usually occurs on one side of the face, but I just drew it over there for room. So what I'm going to do now is if we look, this is the ear, that's the ear, that's the hole where the sound comes in. This is going to be the eardrum, that blue thing right there. It's also known as the tympanic membrane, right? And what's going to happen is this, is when sound comes in, it vibrates the tympanic membrane. You have these green lines here, that's going to be my ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes, right? This is the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. So sound comes in, it vibrates the tympanic membrane or the eardrum, which is going to basically vibrate the malleus, which is going to vibrate the incus, which is going to vibrate the stapes right here. And then the stapes is then going to go, and it's going to, if you see it's attached right here to this oval window, it's going to cause that to vibrate, which causes a fluid to basically make waves, which is going to end up sending signals to the brain. Okay, I have a video on all that if you want to watch that. But here's what happens. When there's a loud noise, you have a muscle. Well, you have the muscle here all the time. But to help with loud noises, you have this little muscle right there. This is going to be called, or this is called, the stapedius muscle. And what the stapedius muscle does is when there's loud noises, it contracts. And when it contracts, it limits the amount of vibration that stapes does to this oval window, which limits the height of the waves that's being made in the fluid that's inside the cochlea. So therefore, the sound is decreased that gets to the brain. You also have the tensor tympani, but that isn't innervated by cranial nerve 7. So now, here's what's going to happen. Again, if I have damage to this facial nerve, this stapedius muscle will not be able to contract. So it can't limit the amount of vibration the stapes is feeling, and therefore it doesn't limit the amount of the wave, so it doesn't really decrease the amount of sound that's getting to the brain. So these people may have a sensitivity to hearing, right? So they're gonna have hearing sensitivity. They may complain of sounds being too loud, okay? The other thing that's gonna happen is you also have this nasolabial area here, these nasolabial folds, that's these lines that are right here. And these may also become smoothed out when someone has Bell's palsy. And again, that's if there's damage to the facial nerve. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is let's draw a line here, and now we're going to talk about the upper face. So let's talk about the upper face. I'm going to have a nerve that comes like this, and it's going to go to the upper face. And it's going to go to this here, and this right here is called the lacrimal gland. And the lacrimal gland is going to produce tears, right? So this is going to make tears. The tears actually come down and they keep your eye moist, and then they actually drain into your nose, right? But in this case, the lacrimal gland, if I have damage to this facial nerve, the lacrimal gland is not going to decrease tears, and so therefore, people may complain of having a dry eye, right? Eye dryness, right? Because they're not producing enough tears. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a part of this that's going to go to the eyelid. So what this facial nerve does is it closes the eyelid. So what happens now the nerve is damaged and I can't get intervention to that muscle that closes the eyelid, what's going to happen is there's going to be the inability to close the eye. All right, so there's an inability to close the eye, right? The other thing that's going to happen, I already mentioned this here, is you can have a nerve that goes up here. And once again, this is facial nerves in the upper part of the, I'm sorry, not nerve. This is the facial muscles in the upper part of the face. And so again, I'm just drawing them right there to represent all the muscles. But what'll happen is those will now stop working. So now you may get some drooping on the upper part of the face, right? So we already said facial drooping on one side of the face, right? So that's going to be due to this and this. So that's if we have the damage here in the facial nerve, right? That's if we have the damage here in the facial nerve. But let's look at something else real quick, just to distinguish this. Let's say instead of getting the damage down here, I get the damage up in here. Well, here's what's going to happen. This is why this was important. If you notice, this goes to both the anterior facial nucleus and the posterior facial nucleus. Well, if there's damage here, there's nothing that's stimulating this nerve that's right here. So I'm going to have all of this stuff that was happening in the lower part of the face is still going to happen. But the stuff, but if you notice, if this is cut off and I'm not getting anything back here into the posterior facial nucleus, well, everything in the upper part of the face is still going to work because of the fact that we still have this ipsilateral cortical bulbar tract still supplying innervation to this nerve here. So the upper, if you see the upper part of the face is still working, they can close their eyes, they're not complaining of dryness, they don't have the drooping in the upper part of the face, but the bottom has all this going on, then chances are it's a problem that's coming from somewhere up in here. Okay, so that's it for Bell's palsy. It's a lot, but thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe button, and we will catch you next time.